Welcome, everyone. I'm Ekaterina, co-founder of Futureline Academy, and welcome to our podcast today. I'm so excited to introduce our incredible guest, Jeri. Jeri is CEO and co-founder of Till5. And apart from being incredible entrepreneur and everything Jeri is doing at the moment, I feel like Jeri is superhuman. When I was reading through Jeri's story, I couldn't wait for today's conversation. So to give you an idea who Jeri is an inventor, product creator, chip designer, and system level engineer. Her love for invention began with building race cars before working with hardware design. She was also the first team member hired into the hardware R&D department and Valve Corporation and contributed to early development for Valve VR, or as we know, HTC Vive. She then went on and started her own company, CastAR, that was the largest AR project on Kickstarter, raising 1.9 million. And then she raised additional 15 million in venture funding. Her combined passion for gaming and bringing the entire family together in the living room culminated in the creation of Till5, the world's first augmented reality gaming system. And we will talk about all these different parts of Jeri's career, whether it was about running the company of her own and raising money, or it is about working for a big corporation where you have to deal with a lot of interesting people, building something from scratch and creating the culture of innovation. So I'm so excited to welcome you, Jeri. How are you doing today?
It's a little early in the morning for me. I usually get a later start, so I'm a little tired, but I'll try to bring the energy. Thanks for having me on, by the way.
Thank you for coming. I have a bit of a fan moment right now because I feel like, seriously, what you've been doing throughout your career and what you're doing now is incredibly inspiring on so many levels because you're a creative, you're an engineer, you're an entrepreneur. You do so many incredible things that no one ever thought of before. And you're doing, seems like, with such ease and such positive attitude that I personally want to learn from you how to do this, how to start companies, how to get investment, how to lead teams, and how to stay human throughout all this process. So, Jeri, let's start with your story, which is incredible. And we'll have to skip some parts because seriously, you've done so much that it would be impossible to cover in any podcast. And anyone who wants to hear more about anything that Jeri does outside of it, we'll share a few other links that hopefully will bring more story to this context. But I want to start with an interesting part that hopefully will recap to this point, which is you obviously been this creative engineer. You've done incredible things. You have your own YouTube channel. You work for a toy company. And then you were hired by Valve Corporation to start this R&D project and hire the entire team to build their first hardware product. Tell me anything that I missed in this very short introduction, though. Help us understand why Valve decided to hire you and why did they believe that you can actually turn around the entire company, build their first hardware, and then how did this story evolve?
Yeah, it's a complex story. You just, a little side note, you reminded me of a speech that I gave one time. I got tired of only talking about all the highlights of my career. So I thought I would give a talk at this one event where I talked about all the kind of lowlights, like where I failed and had problems. And it was pretty hilarious because, a lot of times people introduce me with my successes or whatever. It sounds really exciting. And at the end of the event, the promoter of the event came up to me and he's like, "Ooh, that wasn't exactly what I was expecting. It was so depressing." But, I think that's one of the things we have to keep in mind, that whoever we look out into the world, they probably went through a lot of challenges to get where they are. To your point, you're asking, what did you miss? I could probably talk for 2 hours on all the wacky stuff I've done through my career. But one main thing that I really want to emphasize is my career has been deep collaborations with mentors throughout my life. So started pretty early on. I didn't know what mentors were. I had mentors in this little logging town that I lived in that taught me electronics. These were ham radio operators. Then when I had this wild hair to decide to build race cars, there were machinists that I went and exchanged labor in exchange for them mentoring me, taught me how to build the cars. People that knew how to set up the cars were very generous with their time. When I had a chain of retail computer stores in the 90s, I didn't know how to run a business at that point. So locals in the communities that I was in took me under their wing and kind of taught me how to run a business. And same for Silicon Valley electronics and chip design, just hundreds of people that generously gave their time, all in exchange for my eager reciprocation of like, they would give me information and I would eagerly like thank them and appreciate it. So for anyone, young or old that's, in industry or business, like, don't be afraid to have mentors and give up that vulnerable side to yourself, because it is a level of vulnerability to admit that you don't know something, that you may need a little bit of assistance and have these people to lean on. So yeah, I think as far as why Valve found me interesting, I think it was a composite of all of these interesting things that I did in my life. And a lot of these things I did in my life were partly because I was a very angsty child. I always had a chip on my shoulder. I didn't like when people told me I couldn't do something. So sometimes that was the motivation just to brute force my way into different things like racing, running my own chain of computer stores, or even chip design. Having dropped out of high school, never went to college for any of this. I don't recommend it. It's a big uphill battle trying to break into these industries and do these different things, but you can absolutely do it, if you surround yourself with the right people. And I think to the point of like Valve and why they were very interested in me, besides my creative side, they saw my YouTube channel, which is just this hybrid of art, science, technology, user interfaces, all kinds of wacky stuff on there. They saw that I could build teams, and that kind of came about, maybe it started when I had my chain of retail computer stores, like learning like how to make a team. One of the things I learned then was like finding people that are passionate about whatever you do. It might be building computers, configuring computers. There's people in the world that is what they live for. And if you can find those team members, they're going to work really hard. They're going to be very creative. Same in chip design, product design, toy design. There's people that, where their brain chemistry works, that is what they're obsessed about. They would do it for free almost if you weren't paying them. Not saying you should take advantage of people, but those are the folks to look for. And so in Silicon Valley, I got this reputation early in my career after I kind of tricked or brute forced a couple startups to take a chance on me, that not only could I bring like talent to do the designs, I could also find the people and drag them along with me. So a lot of my early career was just a group of people that I would tap in at different times, depending on what the project was. And so I worked at dozens of startups and solved a lot of tough problems and did aerospace, video compression chips, just super fun stuff. The story of Valve, they were trying to recruit me for probably 6 months. I'm a pinball collector, the big arcade machines with flippers, right? And I go to these collecting shows and these events where you can, hang out with hundreds of people playing these machines. And it was kind of funny. I'd go to these events and like a Valve person would slink up to me and be like, "Hey, you're Jeri. We've been trying to reach you." It was kind of funny how they stalked me for a while. They were sending me messages on social media, and I was just like, I don't know. A software company wanting to get into hardware, I ignored them a lot. And then ultimately, Gabe Newell flew down to Portland, where I was living at the time, and took me out to lunch. And so he started to paint this grand vision of what he was thinking for Valve hardware, and still was not convinced. I just want to pause here. I'm going all over the place. Is this what you were looking for?
Absolutely. I love when you just quickly like drop things like aerospace engineering and I don't know, incredible things that you've done that just blows my mind. I think anyone would be ever lucky to do one of the things that you've done throughout your career, and somehow you managed to do all of them. And I feel like there is no surprise that Valve really wanted you, and that's why they were hunting down you everywhere you went, because they could see how much value you can bring, as you mentioned, from getting the right people to recruit the right people to build a team. Obviously, your overall experience in technology, innovation, engineering, and just coming up with incredible things, but also they clearly saw that you can see the future and come up with something that no one else can come up with. So would love to hear, after you finally said yes, and I don't know what was the final drop that made you say yes, what happened then and how did you start building this incredible R&D team?
Yeah, I think just before I cover that, I think there's one thing that I learned early on. Early in my life, I was kind of paralyzed in my career moves that, if I take a risky move, I might lose it all. And I found, if you're sufficiently motivated, you're not going to lose it all, right? So you were saying like, oh, it's kind of amazing you've done these different things. And sometimes just bravely jumping into something that you're passionate about and doing it, even though it's scary and you have a comfortable like career over here, is not a bad thing. If you're not a 9-to-5er and you just are really passionate about what you do and you go into this new field with passion, I think in generally you're going to have a good success. And so that's how I jumped from chip design, toy design, aerospace. It's just like these different things I wanted to try. And it's like, I don't know anything about aerospace, but I had an opportunity to build the navigation system for the Astra rocket. And it's like, why not? I mean, it's just like any other challenge.
Wow.
Fun video for people to watch on the Astra rocket. Find the video where it flies sideways off the launch pad. That's some of my stuff keeping that thing upright. I'm super proud that it didn't tip over and blow up. But anyway, side note. Continuing with Valve. So Gabe came down, had lunch with him, but I wasn't convinced. I'm like, Gabe's an interesting guy, and I'm sure I'll cover some more Gabe oddities in the discussion. But like, wow, having lunch with him, like he has big ambitions, but having worked at various startups that didn't have the DNA for doing hardware, I was super skeptical. But what he asked me to do is like, next week, just fly up for a day. I just want you to meet the team and let's just have some discussions. It's not an interview. I'm like, okay, I can do that. And at this time, I was very happily doing another project. So, I didn't need to go like hunting for anything else. And so, but I agreed to go up. And the funny thing is, he's like, it's not an interview, but that was a complete lie. So I show up in Seattle and they stick me in a room and it was a panel interview, which I absolutely love panel interviews. It's my favorite interview to do. It's just rapid fire, like 4 or 5 people just like peppering you with questions. And that's exactly how it went. So I'm in this room with various folks. They're like, you're going to make a game controller. How do you do it? I'm like, oh, well, when I worked in the toy industry, I worked with this manufacturer and we'd do it this way. And you're going to make a game console. How would you do it? And it's like, well, I know a lot about game consoles because I collect them. And so easy peasy. And anyway, at some point, partway through this like panel interview, Gabe, I don't know, probably tapped his nose or something. And like everyone got up and left. And it was just Gabe and his personal assistant. He's like, come with me, Jeri. And he took me to the 4th floor of the building they were in. He's like, this whole, painting this big picture for me. This whole floor is yours. You have unlimited budget. You can hire anyone you want and, build your dream team. And he explained a bit more of what he wanted to see out of this. At the time, Windows 8 was imminent. It was coming out. Windows 8 had like 2 interfaces with it. One was called the Metro interface and one was Classic. So everyone knows Classic, but Metro was this interface that could work across phones and tablets and phones. But the thing that scared Valve the most is on the Metro interface, you couldn't have third-party stores. And so Valve's software, a little background for folks that don't know much about it, Valve started off as a video game company. Then they made this distribution platform to buy games called Steam. And then it quickly became the biggest platform on PC to buy games. And it's continued to grow ever since, even since I left. It's amazing. But the Windows Metro interface, you could only have the Microsoft store. So this was a fundamental threat to their business model. If they could no longer have a store on Windows, they had no business. So he's like, we need to find an escape route. And we think playing games in the living room is our escape route. So this is top priority for us. He's like, also, our business is primarily, hardcore gamers, and he had this vision of, or this concept that gamers are in these silos and they don't cross over very well. So there's hardcore gamers, there's people that like, RTSs, there's casual gamers, there's people that used to play games that didn't play games, there's new gamers that haven't discovered they should like games. And he's like, I want you to go out and envision a way to bring the whole family together to play games. So, having worked in the toy industry, where you're just out to delight people. Like this was really enticing, but I wasn't quite convinced still. And he's like, why don't you stay the night and come back and we'll have more discussions tomorrow? And I'm like, well, I didn't even bring clothes. This was just a day trip down here. And he's like, don't worry, the office managers will help you out. So they went to the swag room and got me like Valve t-shirts. And they're like, well, we'll take you by a store and get you all the toiletries or whatever you need. I'm like, wow, this is really bizarre. But I'm like, okay, I can stay one more day. And then I came back to the office wearing my Valve shirt, and I showed up and like Gabe wasn't even there. And the office managers are like, just wander around. Gabe just said, wander around. So the entire day, there was no Gabe there, nothing. I just wandered in and out of cabals. Maybe this would be a good time to pause and talk about the structure of Valve. I didn't really fully understand how Valve worked at the time, but they have this lore about them, about how they operate. The first thing is they claim no structure. So it's a flat organization, no managers. That's not necessarily true, but in concept, that's what it is. Everything's flat. Everyone's peers. They just go get the best of the best, supposedly. And, all the desks are on wheels, and they encourage people to like just roll their desks and do pair programming with artists and just move around constantly, which in concept is good, but not always great. And teams are self-forming. So, if you have an idea, you have to go pitch it and lobby it to other people in the company and get resources and pull them over to your team. And if it's good, it grows and becomes a thing. If it's bad, it withers and dies and goes away. So anyway, I'm just like wandering around Valve, and like there had been some scuttlebutt. I was there. So people were intentionally coming up to me and schmoozing. It was kind of fun and like flattering. Of course, how could I deny at the end of that? But I had this other contract going. It was probably another 6 months or so. And they're like, we want you to start like tomorrow. And I'm like, I can't. I've got to finish this project. And that's one of the things I've always tried to do is, if I have a client or, a company I'm working for, I always try to leave in a good place. I don't abandon anything. And so I'm like, I can't do that. I have to finish this. But, I can give you some like contract hours and stuff, and I'll just do double duty. They were even like, well, maybe we can just pay the other company money to just let us have you. I'm like, no, that's pretty flattering, but I just wouldn't want to leave that way. So that's how I got kind of initially started at Valve. It was a weird roller coaster, very crazy.
This is just fascinating. And I always like imagine a movie in my head while you were describing all the how they would buy a clothes for you and you just need to move in and all of that. It did sound like a scene from a movie. So you join the company and you start building the team. And can you tell a little bit more about how did you decide about who needs to be on the team that you don't know what the team will do? Essentially, you're creating something that doesn't exist. So how did you think about the team and who did you hire to build this new future for the company?
Well, at Valve, they have like the Valve culture. And so, I quickly identified, or it was pushed on to me that, there's a culture that needs to be maintained. And so, having like this background in mentors, I quickly, just started socializing around Valve, trying to figure out if there's any stakeholders. I mean, that's one of the things any company I go to is like, what are all the stakeholders around me? And, what are their needs and problems? And so, I mean, early on, I just continued wandering around Valve, talking to people, like getting lots of opinions of like, we have this threat, like, what's your opinion? I heard Gabe's, but what's yours? And there were a lot of opinions about it and a lot of opinions about what the Valve culture is. And hiring was a little slow because Valve has an interesting hiring process. So it really started with a handful of us in the early days. And then the folks that came in, we kind of refined how we were going to continue hiring to fill out the team. But I had this kind of loose concept at first, since we don't know what we're doing, we should have like 1/3 researchers, 1/3 product people who know how to take concept and turn it into a product and do all the mechanics around that. And then just 1/3 like these maker types that are just, they don't get bogged down in all of the trappings of product design or research. And so that's what we did. We started hiring kind of in these different pools, which made for a really exciting group to work with. And in general, the first couple of years, it was pretty amazing, like seeing that process. Like we were given, literally, they didn't care about budget because Valve makes so much money. So it was probably the first time I'd been given a blank check before. Having come from mostly startup world where every penny counts, it was interesting, filling out like the lab and paying for things that I had never been able to pay for. I didn't go crazy. In fact, I felt extremely uncomfortable. I mean, there were times where we were like getting expensive equipment and, normally we would go get something used or like super cheap for the startup. And, I would go to someone in Valve and be like, I don't know, this thing's like $100,000. And they go like, yeah, we just made that. Yeah, they just make so much money. It's like, just buy it, buy it.
Love it. So I can imagine having unlimited budget and unlimited, I suppose, resources in general, time and everything is on one hand is a good thing. On another hand, it can be a bit difficult to work with because what exactly are you supposed to do? So how did you create some sort of, I love how you talked about the team and structuring the team. I think that probably influenced a lot of what kind of projects then you work on. But then how would you go about on a very operational level? Did you have, I don't know, every month you focus on one thing and everyone kind of tinkers about with it? Or is it just a grand vision and everyone kind of goes away and does their own thing and you catch up weekly? So how did you operate in this environment to make sure you actually deliver something?
Yeah, I mean, that's where Valve is unique from any place I've ever worked before. Again, it comes to this flat organization. So maybe I should tap into that a little bit more and describe it, and that'll kind of tie into the challenges that came later. So this idea that good ideas will bubble to the top and people will rally behind it, in theory, is pretty good. But when you actually do it in practice, you end up in a challenging situation where, you put, one of the guys at Valve said, we're all lead guitarists with no drummer. And I thought that was a good analogy. So you have a lab full of researchers that will research forever. They don't care about productizing things. So they're happily off, researching stuff that's, 50 years away. And then you have product people that are highly disciplined and, they want to figure out what their MVP is and drive towards getting their product out. And then in the middle, we had the kind of maker types that were just happy. Like, the researchers want me to make some contraption. That's where I'm happy. And, the product people need contraptions and they're happy. So, in many ways, I think the happiest folks were the makers and the researchers. We quickly found out as we started to narrow in on things that actually made a lot of sense when we wanted to productize it. And I lean a bit more towards the product side, that frustration started setting in because then we had to get into the political battles inside Valve to try to get like our ideas to percolate to the top. And so just to describe how political and nasty it can get in this kind of environment. So just imagine there's like a game team that has a lot of personnel on it. And I'm just this new person with a group of weird hardware people wanting to productize stuff. So we're socializing around Valve and we're talking, we need programmers and artists and things to come develop this. We go talk to team members on this game team, get them excited. They move over to our team and abandon that project. Now we found we had enemies inside the company. And, without a management structure to control that, there's a lot of backstabby stuff that can happen. So that's where, when Valve works well, it works great. When it doesn't, it becomes very toxic. And having worked in a lot of industries, there's definitely a different culture depending on which industry you're in. And having been around the games industry, it's not as disciplined and as mature as other industries. Like the toy industry is very disciplined. They've been doing this for hundreds of years. They have a process. They don't have time to worry about, all of this weird politics or who you are, what you look like. It's just we have a task. It's got to get done fast. I did not find that in the games industry at any point that I've worked in it. So it's a little bit of a disappointment in the games industry that, at least from my frustum of what I see, doesn't exist at the same level as other industries. So yeah, it was very, very interesting as we started to try to rally to build these products. And Gabe like encourages this kind of, cutthroat behavior. And at one point we had a really great project going. In fact, it's what Tilt 5 is built off of. And we had some traction. People liked it. It was one of the most popular demonstrations in the hardware lab. Every VIP that came through used our system, liked it. It's like, okay, we got a product winner here. And so I went out to lunch with Gabe and I'm like, people are attacking me and this is really rough. Like, what do I do? And he's like, Jeri, all the best things that have ever happened at Valve have been a handful of people with arrows sticking out of their backs. I'm like, that's so terrible. So yeah, pros and cons working for Valve. Also, we were having trouble hiring too. So we had to rely on external firms to do stuff. And, I've had mixed results with external firms doing stuff. Maybe I should describe the Valve hiring process. It's pretty interesting. So, the first half of the day, it's the hardware team, R&D lab is interviewing with technical stuff. And then it goes to lunch, which is kind of the secret culture meeting. So some old timers in Valve will take the candidate out, have lunch with them, and try to figure out if they're the Valve type, which is so loosely defined. Like, what does that mean? And then the last part of the day is everyone has to do a video game design test, which is super frustrating that a machinist has to design a game, right? But the theory is like even the machinist could contribute on a game someday. So we found ourselves not being able to hire like machinists and like these technical people because, maybe the world class technically, either they didn't fit the culture for some mysterious reason or, they're just not gamers and couldn't pass the gaming test. So we just ran hundreds of people through. And it was pretty demotivating for us because like we have a team of like 15, we really need a team of like 30 to like productize something.
That sounds really frustrating, especially when on one hand, you're given this freedom and flexibility to build anything you want. On the other hand, you still have to make sure that it fits within the structures the organization has, whether it's hiring structures or any kind of internal politics. So how did you get to the point where, as far as I know the story, you kind of got fascinated by the world of AR and started building something that became a prototype of some sort? So where was this turning point where stars aligned, the vision aligned, the something started brewing in one direction instead of many?
Yeah, having worked in so many product companies, working in the toy industry, I learned from my mentors and my colleagues, when you're just doing this blue sky kind of stuff, you just have to almost etch a sketch your brain, just try to get all these preconceived notions out of your head of what the product should be and start identifying who your target audience is. And in this case, Gabe defined the entire family in the living room, which is super broad. That was a very unique target audience to think about. And so for several years, we just did all kinds of crazy prototyping. And we tried to keep like a super open mind of like, we need to stand out. Xbox, PlayStation, they kind of look the same. They all do the same thing. What's going to be Valve's competitive edge? So, we had folks that were hooking electrodes to people's heads and trying to do biometric feedback into the game to make them more fun. We had cameras point at people's faces to see like eye tracking. Like, can we like make games more compelling that way? Can we read your emotions from like cameras to like feedback into the game? Different controllers, like is like the Xbox PlayStation controller, the ultimate controller, like, it's like let's not box ourselves in on any of this stuff. But for me, like this idea that, we're going to bring the whole family together. I started off like, well, AR seems like something we could create a moat around our business with. Like no one's done this in the gaming space in any meaningful way. So we just started doing some research. We started off with some VR stuff because it was easier. And, VR was fairly compelling, but it really didn't live up to the family experience that we're looking at. And at the time, AR technology was so primitive that, it was hard to like really know if it was going to kind of have that magic. And so that's where we started to splinter a little bit on the product side. So there were folks that were going down game controllers. And so that was their passion. And we started to teams started to develop around productizing that. We needed some kind of compute box in the living rooms. There was people working on a set-top box. And then there was us just trying to figure out AR, VR, those kinds of things, or alternate displays. And that's where I started to see a glimmer in there. We started spending ungodly amounts of money. We bought these military AR systems and hooked them up to medical high precision trackers and started to you could see the glimpse of how these interactions were going to play out. And once we started having group interactions where we could have maybe 2 people playing in AR, it's okay, there's something special here. So I started devoting all of my efforts into augmented reality because if we can somehow achieve this hologram on the table or a hologram experience, it really feels like that's the magic that could be a living room experience. And, everyone thinks AR as glasses. I kept an open mind. I just prefer not putting things on people's bodies if I don't have to. So we were doing all kinds of crazy experiments trying to do this experience without glasses, with glasses. And actually the technology that ultimately became CastAR, then became Tilt 5, I developed there. It was a complete accident. It was just one of these happy accidents. So AR systems, there's a thing that a projector that generates the image, and then it comes down a bunch of complicated optics, and then it tries to put it into your eye through these combiners. And I had an optics bench set up with this contraption on it. I was looking through it and I was reconfiguring things, and I misconfigured it one day. So instead of projecting the light into my eye, I actually projected out into the hardware lab. And one of my colleagues had been doing some laser bounce experiments with this special type of reflector. And I saw this beautiful image way across the room, many meters away, in this reflector. I'm oh, that's pretty interesting. And then I just filed it away in the back of my head. And then I reconfigured the optics table back to trying to do traditional glasses style AR systems, and just kept working on it. Nothing was good enough. There's these challenges of cost and size and field of view and comfort. And one day I was just frustrated. It's I just had some distance. I could solve everything. And then it just came back to me. It's if I put one of these special reflectors up or lay it on the table, I have the distance I need. And ultimately that's how I developed this prototype, a couple of us. I don't want to take all the credit, but we developed this multi-user experience where you could have 4 or 5 people playing games. And it was an immediate hit in the lab. People would come down from different teams at the end of the day and just kind of park on our system and play these really dumb games that we put together. We had one game where it was bug ridden. It was just bugs everywhere, but that was half the fun of it, was finding the bugs. You just ran around these mazes, and it had this dumb control scheme where you used this magic wand type device that we created to just kind of lead your character through this maze. But people were completely hooked to it. I'm oh, we're on to something. But this is where some interesting challenges in the Valve culture really started to pop its head up, is as we're building that team, as I described before, massive headwinds against us doing this. Because even though Valve was in general trying to be open-minded about bringing the family together, they have a DNA. They are first-person shooter, hardcore gaming through and through. And we're offering up cutesy Nintendo type games down here. And so it became this big drama of how are we going to do a first-person shooter on this thing? When it only does cutesy things. And they were kind of forgetting that they're down there playing for hours and hours. And so that kind of the research side of the team, was keying off of that pretty hard. We need to research how to make something so immersive that you can do the AR stuff and the, immersive kind of VR, first person shooter stuff. And so we found it harder and harder to try to productize anything at all that just wasn't kind of consistent with the DNA of Valve. I remember, anything we wanted to do, even though they don't have a structure, they have a thing called the board, which is kind of the old timers. And if you wanted to try to productize something, you had to bring in analysts, go through, look at what the opportunity is, do basically a pitch deck, just like you would do for fundraising. And then you go to the board and say okay, this opportunity, problem, solution, addressable market, and opportunity for Valve. And some of these opportunities compared to where I was coming out of like startups, like, wow, because of the valve factor and all of these things, this could be like a $200 million first year opportunity or something, just big numbers, unimaginable, in the startup world. And I remember one of the board folks said, that's 0 billions. Come back with something that is not 0 billions. And this is what I was worried about going into a software company. You don't go from 0 to $1 billion on hardware in 1 year. So that was quite challenging.
That is very interesting what you mentioned on many levels. First of all, how I love the story of how it was a happy accident. And I do believe majority of the most groundbreaking technologies, creative ideas or anything are happy accidents created within the environment where someone can spot an accident, where this accident can happen, and all the other things that you have to create to make sure that, again, there is enough of experimentation, there is enough of new thinking, there is enough curiosity that will create those happy accidents. And I love how you talked about kind of this pitch deck that you needed to create based on that. And I know that Amazon works similar way when you have to do this PR press release of any kind of new feature or product that you want to do. So it seems like it's quite an interesting practice in terms of, sizable market, what's your total addressable market, what's this opportunity, whether it is a billion or 0 billion. Dollars or pounds. I would love, and in terms of the context of the history as well, it was before even Google Glass. So I think Google Glass came out in 2013 while you were working on this and before that. So I don't think anyone even seen anything that looked like that or behaved like that in general in the industry. So I'm sure there was a lot of skepticism in general, like, where is this even going? Like, is that even a thing? So what kind of conversations did you have at that point? And was there any traction with this idea, or it was just, it's 0 billions, it's a no?
It's so nuanced and complicated around there. It's hard to really define it down to what the conversations were because it varied depending on who you talk to. Like the culture of Valve is constantly socializing your project and like taking feedback. Coming from like background where I like to have mentors is great. Like, that felt good to be able to like walk up to anyone and get their opinion. But of course you get 100 opinions and everyone has this conviction like that you're doing it right, wrong, or somewhere in between. So for me, not having guidance from Gabe of like, go for it or not go for it was completely new to me and super uncomfortable. I had mixed reactions, some good, some bad. There's, thinking back, there was like a group of folks that were super critical and backstabby to me. And I just stopped talking to them, which, was not a healthy thing to do. So I learned a lot. I don't know. I don't think I would get myself back into an environment like that before. I've been approached by various organizations before, like Microsoft Research. There's all these research groups. And whenever I talk to them, I always ask them, like, how do we go from concept to productization? And like, Microsoft Research and some of these companies, they're like, well, that's not what we do. We make patents and, that's the end product and research papers. And, my passion is like, I want to work with a team, invent something cool, productize it, see it sitting on the shelves and delighting people in the world. And, not everyone, enjoys working in that kind of environment. We're talking about pitching. I think, if someone's, no matter what career you're in, I think learning how to pitch is so critical. And I think really the first place I learned to pitch was when I was racing cars because we had to go get sponsors for the cars. And, I had to promote myself, which was uncomfortable. Later, I think really refined my pitching ability in the toy industry because it's very lucrative to have a toy in that year's lineup. And so the first time I tried to pitch to the toy executives, I was almost in tears. They were so like brutally honest to like how poorly I was pitching the concept. And that's where I learned about addressable markets and my target audience, problem, solution. Then that led to, I tried to implement that in Valve and then learned that not all organizations operate that way. But then it led to, startups where that's exactly what you've got to do. So
I love these different bits of your story that kind of you had to learn all these skills on the go and almost level up every time you had a new challenge. For anyone who hasn't had any experience in pitching to senior executives or to investors, what would be your top maybe 3 tips or advice how to not to get to the point where you are almost in tears and actually get some results out of the pitches that we're having?
Coming from an engineering background and a technical background, it took me a long time to learn not to make the pitches too complicated. So, honestly, you make the pitch, at least the first 5 or 6 slides that, a 12-year-old could understand it, and move fast through them with as much punch as you can and big, bold statements. So difficult for someone from a technical background to do. You just have to make these bold statements of there's this huge problem or, need in the world. The solution is what I got. It's a big market and, here's the unit economics or whatever. It's just you should be able to cover that in 5 minutes. And because managing up to leadership, they're bombarded. Being in a leadership position now as a CEO, you're bombarded with a bunch of stuff. You just don't have the patience to sit through all the nuances of things. You got to get to the punchline fast and then be ready in your pitch. So your appendix needs to be full of lots of supporting information of why these big, bold statements are true, because, they may want to double click down into some of those. And I found, through my career as I got better at pitching, that is definitely the key. One-liners, big pictures, bold statements.
That is a brilliant advice. And I can definitely relate to lots of things that you're saying, that when you're creative or an engineer, I think we sometimes can get lost in all the nuances that we feel passionate about, but not necessarily what the person in front of us wants to hear. And sometimes simplifying things to literally its core idea is actually makes your pitch so much better and clearer. And as you said, you can always have things in appendix and kind of go deeper into the details and the data and analytics behind it.
You have to do the work, right? That's one of the things I learned pitching. I think maybe that's why, my first pitch in the toy industry, I was almost in tears. It's in my mind, I'd been doing all the mental gymnastics of this toy I'm pitching is going to be great. But I was not disciplined enough to actually go through all the work to validate it. And, I got caught flat-footed. And that was uncomfortable and a new experience for me. And, it doesn't matter where you went to school or didn't go to school. These are things that are rarely really taught, in my opinion, at least. And it's things that you have to get a couple of bloody noses and black eyes and, not shy away from them when you do get those black eyes. Learn from it and okay, I'm not going to go make that same mistake again when I go pitch.
Love this. My favorite phrase is pain is just knowledge rushing through your body with the speed of light. And I think those kind of situations where we feel incredible pain, tears or anything, actually on reflection are great learning experience. They don't feel that way in the moment, but then we think well, if that didn't happen, we would have never improved, or we have never thought that it's even something that we should learn.
We're our own worst enemies. And going back to mentors, when I was much younger, I had a much older lady that was a mentor in this hometown, just not on anything technical, just an older lady that was we talk about life. And, when you're in high school or junior high, you do something wrong and you sit there and beat yourself up forever. About it, and you just can't stop thinking about it, and it just burdens you, and it surfaces years later. And one thing she told me is you got to get good at forgiving yourself when you make a mistake, and that stuck with me. And you're gonna make a lot of mistakes, especially when you're trying to do bold things, and you're gonna put your foot in your mouth, and got to forgive yourself, face up to it, make amends for it.
I totally agree with you. There is an incredible psychologist, Adam Grant, who talks about this kind of self-reflection and thinking about something that felt painful is very natural to us. That's how we learn. The question is how much of that is helpful versus not. And kind of what he suggests is to kind of write down all the learning. Why does it feel painful? It feels painful. That means our body is saying we need to learn something here. Okay, what are we learning here? Why does it feel that way? Must be important if the body signals that this is something. And then after you figure out the learnings that you're supposed to get from this, move on, because the rest of beating up is not helpful anymore. Just going back to the situation. You learned your lesson and kind of move on to the next thing that, again, you can do something about.
You have to force yourself into these painful situations too. I don't like public speaking. A lot of folks are like, oh, it's so fun to listen to you do public speaking. It's not something I like to do. I don't like to pitch. I don't like playing that game. But it's like an ends to a mean to achieve certain things, that I want to do. And, having worked with a lot of engineers and business leaders, I think I've seen a lot of folks just shy away from things where they should just face them head on and just get comfortable doing it, as painful as it is. And I'm guilty of that too. It's like, am I going to jump on a plane and go do this pitch, across the country? I know it's going to end bad because I've already done my reconnaissance on these investors, but it's like, all right, I can't avoid it. Just got to go do it, face the pain. And after a while, it becomes fairly straightforward and easy, like any other technical or creative task.
Talking about pain, let's get back to your incredible story, because I feel like there are two interesting points moving from the time that you've discovered something. Then, unfortunately, there was a not so fun, I suppose, part where you actually had to leave the team and start this technology on your own with your own team in a separate place. So tell us more. How did this happen? How did this part of the story end, and how did the new one begin?
It was more like a boot in my back. It wasn't my, I tried to sugarcoat it here and there, but I mean, honestly, it's, I talked about, maybe I wasn't behaving the best, not talking to certain people, but that all stemmed from like this huge rift that was happening in the team and in the company. So at the time, there's a company called Oculus. Maybe you all heard of it at one point or another. But these guys were coming through our hardware lab, and there's a group on the research side that we're just giving them all of our technology that we're developing. And us on the product side, we're like, why are we giving away the keys to the kingdom? And there's huge fights over this. Like, we shouldn't. Our job is to productize and secure up Valve software, not give away the technology. And ultimately, like, this one group rallied to get like everyone working on AR pushed out because we were the troublemakers. And, honestly, most of us were the, product folks. So there's this huge purge, and they pushed us all out of the company. It was like the weirdest layoff I've ever experienced in my life. I've been on like downsizes before where startups are having some trouble and certain people get caught. Usually, you show up, they're like, sorry, we got to cut you, gather your stuff up on your desk, bye, leave right away. This was different. I showed up at the office and I met someone in the elevator that was just steaming mad. And they're like, did you hear what happened to so-and-so? And I'm like, no, like they let so-and-so go. I'm like, that person's on my team. And I'm like mad. I go upstairs to the hardware lab, and it's just like someone had pulled a grenade and threw it in the middle of the room. Everyone's moping around. And I'm like, why are we firing this person? They're like, well, guess what? You're getting fired too, along with 30 other people in the company. And, like, this is strange. Like, what's the procedure now if I'm getting fired? And they're like, well, there'll be a calendar invite. Valve has one of these rules. I actually like this a lot. If you hire them, you fire them.
That's a good logic.
Yeah, it makes you think twice about who you're going to hire, because you may have to fire them in the future. So Gabe hired me. So I go to my calendar, and like 3 or 4 in the afternoon, Gabe Newell has a meeting invite for me there. So we're just kind of hanging out, and just one by one, people are going off and getting fired all day. A bunch of us went off to lunch and drank way too much. Like, who cares? And a funny thing is, I had an interview that day too. And we had a celebrity coming through, which I was always like the person that gave like the tours. It was so bizarre. It was like tell you, it was the most lackluster interview process I ever did. They still had me doing the interview for the new candidate. I'm like, and I took the celebrity through and did the tour. She's like, yeah, we're doing stuff over here. Yeah, whatever.
So it sounds like such a dramatic moment. And the way you describe it, that literally there was like a grenade in the middle of the room. How did you go through this on a personal level? I think you were saying it wasn't an easy day. What, apart from getting drunk with the team and getting all the emotions out, what did you do next day? How did you cope with this? And what kind of thoughts did you have going through your head at that point?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I've always had chips on my shoulder, and this was just a big chip on my shoulder. I get mad. I'm not a person that yells and screams, but, once I get a chip on my shoulder, it gives me like this conviction, so as the day went along, it was my time to go talk to Gabe. And so I had it planned out in my head. I'd ran it through my head 1,000 times what I was going to do. I was going to go in aggressive and like just tell him what for. Of course, I walked in the door and said like one aggressive thing. And then at one point I was like tears and it was a total roller coaster of emotions. But I did one thing as, he said some nice things. He said he was always going to be a fan, which he is. We're still in touch today, even after some stuff I'm going to describe later played out. But I did one thing that was very fortunate for me. As I was walking out the door, I'm like, well, if this AR project's dead, you should sell it to me. And he's like, okay. Yeah. So like, okay, cool. Great. I guess I'm buying this. But then they didn't escort us out of the office. So, I'm like, if I'm going to buy it all, I need to secure the IP. And it's so weird. Like we're there and people are literally pulling stuff off our benches, like oscilloscopes and meters and stuff. Like the vultures were moving in. So I went in and just started securing all the pieces to make sure that the vultures didn't like take the things that were important and stashed them in a closet hallway that I could lock up and hide away from everyone. Also, the other thing I did, which caused a lot of drama, is I brought a bunch of my pinball machines in. So I mentioned I was a pinball collector. So I had like 15 or so of these machines set up in this hallway next to one of the kitchens, and they were very popular. So just out of spite, I just disabled all the machines and, you can fold them up a little bit. So I folded them so that, the machines were unplayable, except for one. This was also near the gym as well. So I had brought in this female bodybuilding pinball machine that was a little controversial because it had a female bodybuilder on it. So I left that one up that was controversial and so that they could still play it. But it's like, you don't get to play my machines for free if you just fired me. But I took a picture of the pinball machines and I just posted a tweet like, yep, got fired today, which then immediately it was this huge firestorm. I think this was even before I talked to Gabe, this huge firestorm of like, because they wanted to like quietly sweep this under the rug. Valve did. They didn't want the bad press about it. And, of course, a lot of reporters are reaching out to me because I was very much the face of the hardware team. They would send me out to do PR events so that we could recruit people and get some excitement about it. And so anyway, I had talked to Gabe, and then I went to the HR where they were giving out these exit packages to the employees. And so, of course, we're all sitting around like, oh, well, I got this big exit package. I got this big exit package. And they were just kind of all over the place, but kind of big. They offered me a small, very small exit package. And I'm like, wait, why are you giving me such a small exit package? And they're like, well, we base it on family situation and this and that. And I'm like, you know nothing about my family. That's private. Like, why are you like gypping me compared to everyone else? They're like, well, this, it's free money. Just take it and just sign this agreement that you won't disparage or talk about Valve. I'm like, no, like, I want what everyone else is getting. They're like, well, take it or leave it. So then the next day, asked, maybe this is not the most mature thing, but I just talked to the press. I'm like, Valve had always been in this mysterious place and only their propaganda gets out like how wonderful it works. So I just started talking to press about like, here's the good and the bad of Valve. So then the HR folks are like writing me like, what are you doing? Like, stop talking. And I'm like, compensate me like everyone else and I'll stop talking, which made it very awkward. Like, I'm negotiating buying this technology. Plus, they want me to sign this exit agreement, which they never budged on it. So
Jerry, can I
still
just
today.
say how incredible and bold you are in your decisions? I feel like when you tell your story, I mean, apart from all the intelligent, crazy, amazing things that you've built and you've done, the fact you never compromise with whatever you felt like is the right thing to do in the moment, I think it's incredible. And this is, I have never met actually anyone who would go against big corporations or important people with just what feels right in their heart and actually doing maybe something that would be regretful after, but what feels right in the moment. Mm-hmm. How, now that you think about it, would you still do the same? Do you think it was the right thing to do?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have no regrets about that at all. I may have regrets that I was not trying to mend, the gap inside the company, but no regrets. It's never been about the money doing any of these projects. I mean, it's throughout my career, frequently I would go work way under, what I should be compensated for because it's an exciting product. I believe in the team. Thanks to thousands of hours of mentors and my father and other people taught me to be ethical, and so I try to stick to that, even when I was running my own business as a computer stores, if a customer was unhappy, I would lose money just to try to make it right. And I really wish there was more of that in business. Unfortunately, the people that get ahead in the world are like the Elon Musks of the world are just horrible people. And yeah, I don't regret saying that. You may be an Elon Musk fan, but there's a lot of horrible people in business. And I honestly believe you don't have to be, but you can also stand up for what's right.
I 100% agree with you. And I spoke to actually many people who bust this myth that to get ahead in life, you need to be horrible and that's the only way. I think there are plenty of different ways to get ahead and create something amazing. Unfortunately, the spotlight now is on the people who did it a certain way, but it definitely doesn't mean that's the only way. And there are great examples of people who are doing it well, staying human, staying kind, staying empathic towards each other. And I'm glad that we have you as an example of a person who is building something incredible and transforming the entire industry and still staying a real person that is not afraid to speak up and not afraid to go after something that is right. So just by us knowing that you exist, I do believe that there will be more people that actually do the same in their careers. So I think it's hugely inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, I also look to history too, to try to comfort myself and have solace that, I can be a good business leader as well as ethical, like books like Good to Great and Built to Last, some classics. They're a little dated now, but, stories of amazing business leaders that, took care of their employees, did the right thing. Also showing juxtapositions of, less savory characters. And it's just there's hope for us.
There is definitely hope.
Sometimes I just want to get vicious. I mean, I do have that edge. In my computer store business, I originally founded that with a co-founder, which we had a falling out. And I became very vicious to undermine his business and make sure that I won in the end. I didn't do anything unethical. I didn't do anything illegal, unethical, basically. But, I wouldn't be undersold and made sure that, I pushed him out of the market. So then I could proceed. But
seems like you have a lot of passion for what you do, Jeri. I think it's so exciting to hear how you navigate different challenges. And I feel like there is no right way to ever deal with conflict or figure out what's the right decision. And it's so great to hear your story. I do feel like you should publish a book though. And then, there will be part 1, part 2, part 3. It will be series. And then someone can do incredible documentary or a Netflix series based on that. But would love to jump to the point where now that you left with this incredible technology, you actually created it was the biggest ever Kickstarter AR campaign. So
I've done it twice.
You've done it twice. So we actually had a lot of questions from the people who know you and who know your story, as well as how do you actually do something like that? Because I think having great technology is one thing, but we talked about pitching, we talked about kind of talking about your ideas. How did you manage to then raise so much money? What do you think made it a success on Kickstarter?
So I got really lucky the first time. people that are successful in business, it's a lot of luck sometimes. And, I haven't had like huge success yet, so let's hope it comes. But so we left Valve, and it was exciting. I could get this technology. And so I gathered up a few folks that got laid off, and we're like, hey, do you want to do this thing? It was good because, there's this huge attention around me leaving Valve. Oculus had just done their Kickstarter on our technology, by the way. Plus, this research team at the same time, just a month or so after the big layoff, they jumped ship to Oculus, like so much drama around it. But anyway, there was all this hype around Oculus. And so Kickstarter was a thing at the time, and it was really hot. Some companies, like you'd get a cooler for like, would raise $10 million. It was, you could throw anything out there. So a group of us like, okay, let's try to make the prototypes and some mock-ups and try to like show this thing publicly. And then let's do a Kickstarter. Let's just follow Oculus's lead. So we quickly did that. I went to some trade shows, got some excitement, and then we did a Kickstarter. And just because everything was really frothy at the time, we raised a little over $1 million on Kickstarter for this CastAR project. And by the way, something to note about Kickstarters, they're a very hazardous way to raise money and very scary way, because you're selling a product and I would recommend anyone that does a Kickstarter have the product ready to ship. Don't do it the way I did it twice, because it's never enough money to actually build the product and ship it. That's why there's so many bad Kickstarters out there, and everyone that fails gets classified as a scammer, even though maybe they had the best intentions. Like, maybe your margin is 30% on the product. Well, you can't hire enough engineers in most cases on 30% margin to then deliver your product. But anyway, we raised a bit over $1 million. And then I knew I had to go raise some money. I was too scared to be CEO at this time. And that was really dumb. It was probably the first time in my career that I was just too scared to do something bold. And so I hired a kind of startup CEO that I knew who was quite good. And we got along well and everything was fine. And he's like, I went on the road pitching with him to Silicon Valley investors. And pretty quickly, with very little effort, the video cut out. Are you still there? Okay, good. With very little effort, very few pitches, we raised $15 million from Andy Rubin, his venture fund. And I'm like, wow, it's easy to raise money for startups. It was just gave me this really weird, skewed view of how to raise money. And honestly, now that I reflect back, our Kickstarter was not very disciplined. We were just lucky that the timing was right. And then raising money wasn't super disciplined either. Timing was just right because there was like this hype cycle. If you've ever seen the Gartner hype cycle, we were right tippy top. And so money just fell into our lap. And that's the worst thing for a startup, is to get too much money up front, in my opinion. Is like you need to be like forged through struggle to make a really good startup. And I've just, having worked at so many startups, I've just seen it time and time again. So we packed the company up from Seattle. We moved down to Silicon Valley. We moved into the incubator with Andy Rubin's folks, and we started working on the product. And that's when things went sideways for us. They probably sensed that we weren't like fully developed for the amount of money that we had. So they started fighting with our CEO, wanting him, again, it's another one of these zero billions things. They're like, Andy's guys were like, how are you going to ship 1 million units in the first year, which is really difficult if you have like a $300 device to ship 1 million units of something like that, as complicated as what we were doing. So he's fighting with the investors. Eventually, he rage quits and leaves. And then that was really the downfall of CastAR, is when the investors started bringing in celebrity CEOs and executives. And my co-founder and I found ourselves just parked in a corner while we had Disney and Sony executives come in. And the company went from like 12 people to 90 people, like overnight. We were buying game studios. The whole product direction had like shifted, like the investors and the new guys coming in didn't like the direction. So we ended up refunding the entire Kickstarter, which I'm so glad we did. So we didn't end up in this like scammer category. Refunded all the money so that they could go in a different direction for the product. And ultimately, they burned through the money in just a bit over a year. It was just evaporated like immediately. It was so tragic.
Yeah, I would love to pause on this story because I think it's incredible, first of all, this story, but also I would say it's very common for Silicon Valley in general, that cycle of raising a lot of money, trying to spend them as fast as possible, kind of driven by investors' demands to grow as fast as you can and spend it on all sorts of things. Looking back at that experience, and maybe you already transferred that into your new startup, but what would you have done differently? Like if you had the same situation, you had the same amount of money, how would you go about it to potentially avoid where it ended up?
Yeah, I think this is just those black eyes and bloody noses I was talking about. Like I thought that I had it figured out having worked in so many startups, but from just kind of an engineering perspective, looking at leadership, I'm like, and I took the easy road, and I fell into like a CTO position. So like, in my engineering comfort zone. And the thing I would have done is I would have been CEO. I would have raised less money. I would have not gone to the incubator where our investors are 10 steps away so that they couldn't keep their fingers into our business. In fact, one of my advisors on my current company, he's like, investors should have their nose in and fingers out. And so that was really stuck with me. So I make sure investors can only have their nose in and keep their fingers out of our business. I don't think there was anything I could do after the money was raised. I think the destiny was set. And this is, Silicon Valley, as you mentioned, they're just looking for 1 out of 10 companies to become a unicorn that they can flip over to a Facebook and Google and get like huge returns on it. So they don't care about the founders' ambitions. Honestly, I looked at my investor tracker sheet where I'm very meticulous about who I've talked to investors. I have over 800 investors I've talked to. And, this is not disparaging investors. They have a business to run and they're pretty cutthroat about it, but they are about maximizing returns and making some gambles, not necessarily making founders successful. Yeah, as much as they tell you they have these resources to help you be successful. So, from Andy Rubin's perspective, like he wanted us to moonshot it, his own words. And when it didn't work out, they just tossed us to the curb.
That is horrific, but also thank you for sharing your learnings and your reflection on this, because I actually love how you said raise less money. I think it's very unusual for people to talk about on reflection. I think we should have raised less money, but I appreciate your perspective that it does create the pressure that potentially is not needed at that point in the company, and maybe growing slower and kind of figuring things out as you go and not giving away too much equity and staying as the CEO because you can actually figure things out while you are growing at that pace, I think is incredibly important.
I think this also applies to, a lot of organizations, right? Once we got the $15 million, it was board meeting after board meeting. Like, why aren't you hiring faster? Why aren't you investing? Like, we gave it to you to invest. Like, at this rate, you're going to have 5 years of runway on this. And it didn't matter how many times we told them, like, we're getting there. It was like, you got to move fast, break things, all these stupid phrases that you hear around Silicon Valley. I've also seen it in other organizations, medium to large companies, right? Is this challenge like Valve, like we had so much money available to us, a lot of distractions and false starts because like, why don't you just go hire this external firm to figure this stuff out for us? Go blow a few $1 million on it. It means nothing to us. You go do it and, it's pulling your time away from the main team, trying to focus on, an MVP. They don't have enough situational awareness. And then the end result comes back to you. It's nothing that you can use. And you just see this kind of endless cycle over and over and over again. So, as much as investors talk about it's the team, it really is the team. And no matter what investors say, you have to surround yourself with the best team, no matter what the external forces are for you to like scale up faster.
This is such a great advice. And I also love how you talked about the investors and the types of investors you should or shouldn't get. I would love to hear a little bit more of your perspective now that you recently read and doing it for the second time. And I suppose have all these reflections about how to approach fundraising. What kind of differently now, as well as maybe how do you approach investment in general, especially for some people who might be listening this, who never had to raise money and the whole idea of finding people who want to give you money and raise money? Like, how does someone start this process? And maybe what are the key things to avoid apart from raising too much money? But what advice could you give someone?
Yeah, I mean, to complete the picture of what happened. So anyway, we crashed this crater into the ground. We made a big crater. And I think this really ties into fundraising. So bear with me for just a few seconds, but it was extremely embarrassing for me that this happened. It was the first time that I had blown up so much money before. And of course the celebrity executives were gone, as soon as the company went out of business. So I'm sitting by myself in an office with empty cubicles all around me and empty terminals. I'm sitting there feeling sad. And I got this random phone call from Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari, who I barely knew. I don't know how he got my phone number, but he called me and he's like, Jeri, this is Nolan. I'm like, Nolan, who? And he's like, founder of Atari. He's like, I've had a lot of failed and successful startups. I love what you're doing. I just want to give you one piece of advice. It's magic. You just need to figure a way. I can't tell you how, just figure a way to make it happen. And so that's when I went out to my network and I started talking to other entrepreneurs and, folks around Silicon Valley. I'm like, is it really bad that I blew this money? And quickly I learned from them, it's like, oh no, most of these successful entrepreneurs have a handful of creators, left behind them. It's like, just reposition it as a learning experience. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe I can recover from this. So that was a nice, at the perfectly timed little boost that I needed. So I reached out to some of the team members that were really the rock stars. I'm like, if we can get these assets and buy them, would you give it another go? And people really believed in what we're doing because it's a great experience. And so we formed a little team and we bought the assets with our own money. And then we kind of discussed how we were going to operate the business. And it was an agreement that I should be the CEO and never let go of that as long as I can. And, we all got into our swim lanes, as they say, and we started to reboot the company. And, talking to a lot of folks and bringing on advisors, I worked hard to bring a lot of advisors on into the new company to guide us. One of the things that I decided to do is to say no to any money that seems problematic. And that's really hard to do at times. So early days, we were getting the company bootstrapped with a few $100,000 at a time. So the 4 or 5 of us working on this, I'd go get a few $100,000, then get us 6 months. I would tie that to some kind of deliverable, constantly out pitching, just getting ready for that next little infusion, another few hundred, bigger, bigger, bigger. And that's worked out well. But till 5, we have been probably 2 weeks from going out of business at least 4 times. And just vigilant out there raising money. The money's always came through. It could have went the other way. We could have been out of business, but I got lucky. So luck is on my side. I just raised some more money, which is good. So I'm excited about that. I can breathe for a few weeks, and then I'll have to be back out on the road to make sure that I'm kind of queuing up what's going to happen in a year and a half. And
does it get easier fundraising the more rounds that you go through and the more investors that you meet? Does the game become easier, or it's still as hard as it was at the beginning?
Oh, it's just as hard. So, the dynamics of raising money from investors, you just have to look at it from their perspective, and then it becomes a little less personal. Any venture fund out there, they have 4 or 5 partners, and then they have a pool of money. And each of these partners will only do a couple investments a year because they've got to sit on the boards of these companies that they're funding. And they don't want to stick on a board for a long time. So anyway, they're very, very cautious about dispensing their money on their gambles. Also, the pitches are really amusing. I find them very amusing now. Actually, talk about the company culture. What would I do different? So at CastAR, the company culture quickly became corporate, where the executive team was super secretive from the engineers and trying to withhold information, which is really unhealthy. And I've always liked to have extreme transparency. And so that's what I brought to Tilt 5. All these times I'm like, hey, we're a few weeks away from running out of money. Everyone on the team knows that. Everyone knows what our cash position is, and our all hands every week, here's our cash position. we're fucked if we don't raise money in, this couple of weeks. And what I found is that transparency is so helpful in like loyalty in the team. And this even goes back to my computer stores when we had like this great run with the computer stores, and then the whole market changed, and then we started losing money like crazy. And I was too naive back then, or to know I should be keeping stuff secret. So I was just extremely transparent, and it was amazing seeing that team rally to try to pivot the company and make it successful. And in fact, I gave away one of the stores, and it's still running today. So
Wow.
I don't know. I went off track. Let's see. Fundraising. There's different sources for money too. And each sources of money comes with its own hazards. So I've raised a lot of money from strategic investors. So that's always a good place to get money, is from strategic. So if you have a technology that a company needs you to exist in the future for reasons, like we're a hardware product. So there's components that go into our product. So we have some investors that put components into it. They need us to exist so that they can sell parts. That's a good source of money. There's people that want to use our product. That's a good source of money. Now, the hazards with those type of investors is, as one of our advisors put it, and I hope our current investors aren't listening, you got to defang them, get rid of their fangs. So you have to be very careful about how your board is structured. So if there's some component in your device, they can't like force you into only using that device or that component when it makes no economic sense. And so that's tricky to do. You have to like navigate that very carefully. And, traditional venture funds like Sandhill Road, they're looking for their unicorns. So there's a lot of hazards there. Early money, I found, I call them the parasites of Silicon Valley now. There's a lot of very small venture funds where they give you money, but they try to extract it right back out of you. So there's almost no risk to them. So I said no to so many of these companies. So they're like, well, we'll give you $100,000, but you need to hire our person to be on your team for $10,000 a month. It's like really scammy. So you got to watch out for those. So many hilarious stories. It's like, I love coming back to the team after pitching because you receive all of these different objections and criticisms when you show your concept to investors. And some of them are so ludicrous. Like we'll go in with a prototype that has white plastic on it. And like someone will get obsessed with the white plastic. Like, I don't think it'll be successful because it's white and I like blue. And you come back and tell the team, like, you cannot believe what this person told me. Like, I wouldn't want them on my board, even if they offered.
Love it. Actually, if we can, because I'm also conscious, you have so much wisdom and knowledge, Jeri. I do believe we can have another 2 hours talking about investment and invention and the future. So to maybe wrap up this part of conversation, because maybe we'll have a part 2 another day.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because I think there is so much to share. But I would love to maybe, if you could summarize maybe 3 red flags for investors or investment. So if anyone wants to fundraise, because you mentioned there was little interactions when you kind of feel like, okay, maybe I want to stay away from this money. So what would be the top 3 red flags that you would watch out for?
From my experience, a major red flag with an investor, and you should cut ties as fast as possible, is if they draw a line in the sand and they say, like, we'll invest if you do this thing. That's why we did a second Kickstarter at Till 5. We had an investor that promised us just the right amount of money. Just go do a Kickstarter. And, if you do well at Till 5, we had the first and the second largest AR project ever on Kickstarter. We did a fantastic Kickstarter, in a not very good time for Kickstarter. We went back to the investor, like, we did it. We're the largest, project on Kickstarter right now. And they're like, well, we were hoping you'd raise, instead of 2 million, like 8 million. It's like, we did all of this for you. And, why would we come to you if we had raised 8 million? We'd go to like Andreessen Horowitz and raise $50 million. Like, so that's a red flag. And I've had that a lot. Just go do this thing, go fetch a stone for me and bring it back. My experience, they never invest. So just cut them off. The next thing is and this might be the female dynamic in raising money. So only 2% of money goes to female founders. It's absolutely tragic. And heaven forbid you have some other minority combined with being a female. It's probably even worse. And these numbers come out every year. It never changes. I run away from any investor that feels misogynistic or is disrespectful, because I do not want them on my board of directors, because, there's a lot of these typically guys, unfortunately, that think they know everything about your business, even though they have no, background in it or situational awareness. You said 4 red flags? There's so many, but
three is more. I think we've got 2. Let's do the last one. What would be the last top red flag?
Well, I'd mentioned some of them. Don't raise too much money. I think family funds can be particularly hazardous. This is the third type of investment I didn't talk about. So there's big pools of money associated with wealthy family funds. These can be really big time sinks. What I found is sometimes they have mandates, and I think try to do some preliminary research on it before you even talk to them and find out if you fit their thesis and their mandate. I've certainly gone to some of these family funds, and they really like me or they like the product, but they'll just burn so much of your time because they can't find some way to shoehorn it into, their thesis. And it's a numbers game. Going back to they'll only do a couple investments. And like I mentioned, on my investment tracker, I looked at the other day, it's over 800 investors that I've talked to. So it's just like, get to that fast no, or at least figure out where they're at. They'll never tell you up front. They want to keep the door open, but just try to get to that, definitive no, so you can move on to the next one. Because you got to turn the crank a lot. And don't wait until the last minute. Like I mentioned, I just raised money. I'm probably going to take a month off, and then I'm going to be out there kind of queuing up and making sure I'm ready for a year from now.
Wow. I mean, this is great advice. And thank you so much for sharing, especially with your breadth of experience and personal stories that you had to go through. I think we are so lucky to benefit from things that you've experienced rather than all of us going through the same and then learning the same thing. So thank you for sharing. I would love to finish maybe on a positive note, because I mean, you are building incredible things at the moment. And I think Tilt 5 is an incredible company. For everyone who hasn't heard of it or haven't checked out the product, please do. It brings people together. It allows you to play board games together with the help of AR. It makes it more exciting, collaborative, entertaining, beautiful technology. And now that we know more about the founder behind it, we should definitely all go and try it out. So let's go and support this incredible new technology. I would love to hear a little bit more about your perspective on the future, Jeri. Whether you can take it at any kind of path, whether it is from technological perspective, what excites you about maybe things that are coming out, because you're always at the forefront of what will be happening before anyone else knows about VR and AR. You're already building something. So what I suppose is on your mind about the future that excites you right now?
Well, before I do that, I just want to talk about evolution of emerging markets, and it'll tie into that. And this kind of ties into investments too, which is really tragic. It's like you look at the Gartner hype cycle, there's a bunch of hype, trough of disillusionment, and then, the long tails where the evergreen companies come out of. And I love history and a history of tech. And almost every industry that I look to, there's been a lot of hype about it. And then it actually takes 30 years to develop, or 40 years to develop. Home computers were a great example. Us nerds that were into home computers got them, but it didn't become a thing for 20, 30 years where everyone has one. Cell phones, automobiles, everything kind of follows that same curve. I mean, there's exciting stuff going on with AI right now. I think that, we're maybe going to start to descend over that peak of the hype cycle. And we're going to have some low times. I smell blood in the water around here in Silicon Valley. There's going to be a lot of mortality coming. But yeah, I think, 30 years AI is probably going to be one of these things that people meaningfully use on a daily basis. So I'm pretty excited about that, but I think there's a lot of pain between now and then. We're going to quickly get to the point where it's 90% accurate, and it's that last 10% that we just can't tell whether it's, giving us the right answer or not. Yeah. I wish I had a crystal ball. I've been so wrong throughout the years just looking at products. Since I love physical products, I'm always looking at things that come out and trying to gauge whether they're going to be good or bad. And I've got it right and wrong. I'm probably wrong more times. Like the iPad. I'm like, this is stupid. What are they going after? And I was so wrong on that one. Like,
well, I think it's okay to be wrong on things. I think that's part of, I suppose, innovation and everything else. I think it's interesting to hear how you think as well, because even if the technology might not be the one that is the leading one, I still believe that you see the future much further and much broader than all of us. So just even hearing where your mind is going is actually really exciting. Are there any other technologies apart from AI that are on your radar that just purely excite you? They might not go anywhere, nothing might happen, but something that you feel like, this is kind of new and interesting. That's where what's being developed?
I mean, on a super nerdy level, I'm excited about, optical interconnects and, these hybrid chips that combine optics plus digital, logic. I think that, Moore's law has been, the law that, we can just keep packing more and more transistors on chips. Like that's kind of petered out. And so there's got to be some kind of shift that happens that gives us more compute power per watt. And I think that shows some promise, speeding up interconnects so that we can, a little nerdy, but
I love this side. I think it's, all the great things come from all the nerdy places. So all, as you said, all technology we are using, they were nerdy things at one point. So I think this is...
Oh, I know another area. I'm sorry. Now I'm going to geek out. This is an area that I'm actually trying to move towards working at is metamaterials. These are very interesting materials that can do strange things to radio waves and optics. They're just little micro patterns that are formed in a particular way that can bend light or bend radio waves in incredible ways that have never been possible with traditional like glass or other like reflectors and stuff like that. I think that, that's starting to come of age and we're going to start seeing things. And what this means to folks that aren't into this, right now our cell phones like have these amazing cameras in them, but you've got these ugly warts that are sticking out of like the front so they can have enough space for lenses and stuff. I think we're going to start to see development where lenses will become very flat. It's going to be great for making products because now we can put cameras and sensors in places that we couldn't put them before.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That makes me very excited about the future and how technology forms the form and the shapes of the objects around us. And what does that mean for design and the creative community we actually speak to? So thank you for sharing this. Jeri, I have one last question left for you, which is a bit philosophical. We ask this question to everyone who comes on our podcast. If you could change one thing in the world, what would it be?
I wish I had a magic wand to make people be nice to each other. We're just in a terrible time right now. There's just so much division and hate out there. And being an extremely empathetic person, and working in Silicon Valley where there's a lot of diverse people, you're just seeing the hatred around the world, the wars, it's just breaking. That's what I would change.
More kindness. I'm with you. Let's get this magic wand out in the world that will make people more kind to each other. 100% agree with that. And thank you so much, Jeri, for being kind and for being empathic to everyone and to sharing your knowledge and your wisdom. And I admire so much everything that you've done and everything you're doing and how you approach the world around you and how you combine its intelligence and innovation, but also empathy and this future thinking and creativity overall. Seriously, you're such a great example of someone who not just has creative and great ideas, but also makes businesses out of them and constantly keeps going no matter what obstacles you have on your way, which is...
You're making my head swell with all of these compliments.
You do deserve all of them, but just hearing your story is so inspiring and uplifting for all of us. So thank you for finding time between the fundraising and all the other important things that you are doing. Thank you for this. And thanks everyone for joining. It has been incredible to have you all for this conversation. We have many more conversations coming our way. Thank you, Jeri. It has been such a pleasure. Any last words, anywhere you want to send people to find you or anything else you want to mention?
Yeah, check our product out at tilt5.com. It's pretty exciting where we have big focus on entertainment. We're going to be enhancing that a lot over the next year, thanks to raising money. And also we're moving into more professional uses and educational uses, which my passion is part of the reason I did my YouTube channel is to give back, mentor, education. So I'm excited that our company is moving in that direction as well.
Love it. Well, we're all about never stopping learning. So we do believe that education can transform so many things. And it's great to hear that technology like yours will be transforming that sector as well. So thank you so much, Jeri, for sharing all your wisdom and knowledge. And thanks everyone for joining. And until next time. Bye.